Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being so respectful. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce a friend of mine and a paranormal investigator of the group The Fog, also someone practicing in neo-shamanism. I'd like to welcome my good friend, Jose Gonzales. Please, sir.
Not yet?
No, yeah, yes.
That's good?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to try to stay away from that speaker. Try not to talk too loud. I'll get adjusted to it. Welcome, everyone. I want you to take some time right now to remain quiet and remember those that we've lost in our families, our friends. This is a time in Mexican culture where we think of our family and our ancestors, and it's called the time of Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead. I have to say to you that this is not a costume, it is a culture. And with all cultures and ancestry, we respect that. So I respect all of you for being here tonight. Thank you for giving me time to come back to the Dickens. Thank you for Daniel and Dylan and Sid, and Destin and Jackie and everyone else here involved today. Very special time. I'm going to take my time going through these stories. As always, I do them in a Native American way where it's very open. I will tell personal stories, but I also like to give all of you some information on where these come from as well. So I like to sit down and read them to you, so if you're okay with that, that's fine. So bow your heads or look up to the sky, whatever your culture is. I'm opening up the circle now, the Creator, and all the four directions of the archangels, in Jesus' name. And everyone else that we honor on that sacred side of the veil. Watch over all my friends and family tonight and wherever we may go. Thank you for our gathering. I pray that we all have a safe journey and that to wherever we go, we do good and we look out for each other because we are all family under the sky. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Are we ready to go with the loop? What you need?
I need you put this microphone.
Oh, do you want to take that off of me? I don't even need that tag, do I? I'm not leaving.
Great. And then also the loop, we're going to test something real quick.
You guys good with us testing the loop? I want you to see this little video loop I created, and it's in honor of my friend Lyle Blackburn, who is a cryptozoologist. A good friend of mine. I'm very glad to see Miss Linda Godfrey is here tonight. It's very special to me to have her here. Her and her husband are some wonderful people. So thank you, Linda and Steve, for being here as well. You good? We'll let that play. Maybe the spirits here don't want us to play that. People asked last year that they really loved the lecture that I gave and they wanted to see more pictures. So I tried to do my best to give you more of a visual. Helps you interact more. And I know it's late, so some people want to fall asleep like myself, but we are here for a good time. I want to keep your attention. That's why I don't do PowerPoint, because after about 15 minutes, we'll fall asleep. And I want you to be able to hear these stories. Please keep an open mind when I share these stories today, too. They come from my family. My uncle is out in the crowd. He shared a lot of these from my upbringing, so I'm very honored to have him here. All my family's in the back wall, against the back wall there too. So thank you guys for being here, for your support. Here we go. Or not. On my altar. No sound? It's coming, guys. There it is. Okay. So just go ahead and go to the lectures and the images, and we'll begin. All right. We're going to start with our first story tonight, okay? Now we're going into the Mexican culture where we look at a lot of superstition, a lot of magic, mystery, shamanism, sorcery, mixed with Christianity from the time of the conquest when the conquistadors came in 1492 through the Yucatan. As they passed through that lower part of the continent, they came across the Aztec people. During that time, there were many cults. Last year I spoke about a cult of the Bat God, one of the 9 lords of the Mayan underworld. This year I thought I'd start a story about the vampire witches. So I'm going to read this to you verbatim, and this will give you some idea on where these vampires all started. The vampire bats are found only in Mexico. There are 3 different species. They're very small, but they were known to be a plague on the land because people hated that they would come down and attack their cattle. What I'm finding out now is with vampire bats, there's been a great outbreak of bats now attacking people. Of course, they make an incision and then they draw the blood from lapping it up with their little tongues. They look cute, but I'm sure it doesn't feel cute when they're biting on you. You shouldn't feel it. But anyways, going to the vampire witches of central Mexico, this is shared by Robert Bitto, and he's done a lot of research in Mexico Unexplained. So I'm going to read this to you. In the early 1950s, an astute government worker assigned to the Vital Records Department in the central Mexican state, Tlaxcala, kept noticing a strange phrase on the line marked "cause of death" on many death certificates, especially among those of infants in the more rural areas of the state. The phrase was "chupado por la bruja," or "sucked by the witch." This resulted in an investigation in the rural areas by the state authorities from the capital in Tlaxcala City, and eventually led a law passed in 1954 by the state legislature requiring municipal presidents to report all causes of death marked "chupado por la bruja" to the medical authorities in the state capital for further investigation. This strange cause of death was ascribed to the deaths of hundreds of infants over the years, exhibiting the same symptoms and conditions: severe bruising, discoloration of the upper body with the time of death usually at night. The state authorities had no idea exactly what they were dealing with, and after the 1954 law passed, the rural town authorities stopped listing witchcraft as the cause of death on the formal certificates. Perhaps to keep the meddling government out of their affairs, or perhaps to cover up something larger. Tlaxcala is a small state in central Mexico, just east of Mexico City, and was the site of a pre-conquest kingdom called Tlaxcala. which resisted incorporation into the Aztec Empire. The kingdom of Tlaxcala was culturally Aztec, which were my people. Its people spoke the Nahuatl language and shared most of the same religious beliefs with their counterparts in the mighty empire that surrounded them. There was one pre-Hispanic legend, though, that was not shared with other peoples of the region and remained localized even to the modern day. The belief in the Lalhuelpuchi, I'll get it over, sorry. Lalhuelpuchi was a shape-shifting female vampire, and she fed on the life of young infants. The Lalhuelpuchi phenomenon is so endemic to the rural area of this small state that many people in Mexico have never even heard of it. So, what exactly is a Lalhuelpuchi? The idea of the vampire women of this region dates back hundreds, if not thousands of years. They are human women and part of families during the day, but at night they transform themselves into a variety of ways to go about their evil deeds. A Lalhuelpuchi is born and not made, and once you are born a Lalhuelpuchi, you remain that way, and it is said that it is a curse neither God nor the devil can erase. One cannot distinguish a baby destined to become a Lalhuelpuchi from a normal baby at birth, or even through most of its childhood. A young woman usually becomes one of these vampire witches around puberty, and the realization is sudden. After the realization, a woman's soul is lost for 3 days, after which time she becomes infused with special powers, which do not grow or diminish over time. One cannot transfer this condition or any of its powers to another person, so unlike the traditional European vampire. There is no transformation of the vampire's victim into another Lalhuelpuchi. There is no recruitment, and there is no master-apprentice relationship. The woman just becomes a Lalhuelpuchi. And that is out of simple bad luck. Family neighbors may know of it, but they keep it quiet to themselves because there is nothing they can do about it. These vampire women are not group-oriented in the slightest and may even fight amongst themselves over territory. They act alone and are independent agents of evil, but sometimes they do the biting of more powerful entities, such as the devil. A Lalhuelpuchi may interact with the humans on behalf of the devil as an intermediary to make deals or to issue warnings. But that is not her primary function. Much like the European vampire, the Lalhuelpuchi needs human blood to survive, but specifically from the blood of infants. Preferably those aged between 3 and 10 months, because that is the most invigorating to them. They've been known to attack older children and adults, but this is rare and usually out of desperation, because if they cannot kill a baby for its blood at least once a month, the Lalhuelpuchi will die. The killings usually occur during the night and more prevalent in the colder and wetter times of the year. Lalhuelpuchi does not need to lurk around looking for prey every night, but only for a few days a month. One of the main powers of these vampire witches is their ability to shapeshift. They shapeshift into a variety of different creatures, and whatever fits the situation, that's what they become. 75% of the time they change themselves into a turkey, but other times they can turn into a wide variety of animals, all the way down to ticks and fleas. When the Lalhuelpuchi transforms herself into an animal, she gives off a luminescence or phosphorescence. This is one way to identify an animal which is really a Lalhuelpuchi, and makes it easier to track and kill. The glowing nature of this creature is so inherent that part of the name Lalhuelpuchi comes from the Aztec word Huahula, to illuminate. The whole transformation process is an interesting one. On the last Saturday of the month, the Lalhuelpuchi, while still in human form, gathers together ingredients to build a small fire on the floor of her kitchen. The ingredients, each with its own supernatural property, include capulin wood, copal, which is one of the ingredients we put of our candles tonight, and I'll tell you that is to help keep away evil spirits, which is strange that this is in the mix. Agave roots and dry zoporo leaves. She then begins to chant and walks over the fire 3 times in north, south, and east-west directions. She will sit on the fire, and that's when the vampire woman detaches her own legs so as to shed symbolically that part of her that makes her human. That enables her to walk upright. The legs are left in her home while she is off stalking prey or causing havoc in her animal form. If the Twala Pucci needs to travel far, she will transform herself into a crow or a buzzard. If she is local, she may transform herself into a dog, cat, or coyote. When she approaches the home of an intended victim, she usually shapeshifts into a turkey and then flies over the house into a cross pattern. Before she lands, then she cannot enter into the house in a turkey form, so she'll turn herself into an insect or a rodent to get into the house through the small cracks or gaps of the home. And once again, she becomes a turkey and then hunts her prey. Before she kills the infant, she must immobilize the other humans in the home. And she does this by emitting a glowing mist that serves part of like a knockout gas. When she approaches the human victim, she transforms back into a human to go about her nefarious deed. Very few people can resist the paralyzing mist, but some humans who have limited supernatural powers of their own, shamans, for example, are immune to the mist and may fight off the Twala Pucci. In the rare cases, when she has been thwarted, she usually returns to the house, often in daylight, and she's there to cause more mischief or as a form of revenge. Another example, she may come back into the form of a coyote to eat the person's livestock, or to take the form of a donkey to mess up newly planted fields. She may also try to put a spell on a person to cause that person to do harm to himself or even kill himself. There have been reports of Twala Puccis causing people to even walk off cliffs. There are several ways to ward off a potential attack to your home. In a possible blending of European and native beliefs, garlic is often cited as a good way to ward off these vampire witches. The Twala Pucci is afraid of mirrors and metal. I don't know if it's heavy metal, but it's metal. And sometimes the parents of the infants may put a small mirror in the baby's crib or may attach religious medals to the baby's clothes. One reference stated that the surefire way to ward off the Twala Pucci was to put open scissors underneath the baby's crib. This was a combination of a sharp instrument and the metal was a certain repellent. The small innocent victims of these vampire witches are afforded special treatment in death. The body of the baby is cleansed, usually by a local folk healer who is well versed in dealing with these curses and the demonic. There is no music during the wake or the funeral procession. And while the coffin is open for viewing, a cross made of pine ashes is laid out on the floor under the table supporting this coffin. You may ask, can a Twala Pucci be killed? And that answer is yes. It is a complicated yes. And though it somewhat means to be a ritualistic component, it may be another blending of European and native beliefs. And the easiest way to kill one of these vampire witches is to drive a wooden stake into her heart. The second easy way to kill a Twala Pucci is decapitation. Another way to go to her human home and find her detached legs and throw them into a blazing fire. Traditionally, though, an ordinary person could kill one of these creatures after immobilizing her first. There are 3 ways to immobilize a Twala Pucci. 1, you can take off your pants, turn one leg inside out, and throw your pants at her. 2, you can take a white handkerchief, put a rock inside of it, tie up the corners, and throw it at the creature. Where we come from, you roll that sucker up and crack. We're not letting that leave our hand. 3rd, you can take off your hat, and put the hat upside down on the ground and drive a knife or machete through it. And once you have the Huitzilopochtli immobilized, you can kill it in any way you want. It's up to you. Much like Europeans and early American colonists have killed women accused of practicing witchcraft, many women in Tlaxcala have been killed for being suspected Huitzilopochtlis. The last known execution of one occurred in 1973. As with anything on Mexico unexplained, we must examine the evidence and ask ourselves, can Huitzilopochtlis be real? What explains the rash of infant deaths in rural Tlaxcala state, the supposed sightings, and the detailed descriptions of rituals and transformations? And why is this phenomenon relegated to only one small part of the state of Mexico? Is this just the community's way of explaining away high infant mortality in the area? Before I go on to another story that was shared with me, I want to tell you a personal story of my own. So with my background, my grandfather, Jose, who I'm named after, he was a curandero or a healer. He was a Yaqui shaman. And I'm not sure if my mother told this story to my uncle sitting in the back, but it goes like this. When I was an infant, I was very sick. And at first my parents thought, maybe it's just a little fever or flu bug, but it wasn't that. So they got concerned and they took me to the ER. This was in Laramie, Wyoming. And the doc said, we checked him out. It's not croup, it's not anything else that we can resolve here. So the best thing is just keep trying to do what you're doing and hope for the best. Well, I'm the firstborn and I know that my parents were probably very nervous. So my father asked my mother if it was okay if we take him to see my dad. And they took me to my Grandpa Joe. And my Grandpa Joe said, give him to me, and he was speaking Spanish to them. And my mom said that she sat down and he was working on me, and he'd put me in his lap and he'd work on my back and he'd rub these oils, these anointing oils, and doing some other things. He was praying, and then he'd turn me back over and he'd just keep working on my stomach for a little while. She said this went on for a bit. And maybe some of you have seen this ritual with Mexican culture, but what he did that day is took an egg and then he took it over and he did his whole ritual with that. And then he told my mother we were going to leave this under his head for the night. And in the morning, the evil spirit will be gone. He told my mother that what was on me was what we call the ojo, or the evil eye. This is also in other cultures, like in Irish culture and throughout Europe. But the fascinating thing is, my mother, she's very straight, and she said, son, if I had not seen it for myself, I wouldn't have believed it. I was very worried. I thought there was no way in hell I was going to go to sleep. And she said, I watched you all night in the crib, and the egg was right underneath your head. And she said, in the morning, Grandpa Joe came, took it away, cracked it open, and all this dark, looked like blood, mass, whatever it was. And she said, and you were better. And that was the last we heard of it. Now, in our culture, sometimes a way that you can get the ojo is because maybe somebody comes up to you and they see your child or your infant, and we have a superstition about that. It's like, never look too long at a baby. It's like, oh, that's a beautiful baby and all that, but then we look away right away because we don't want to inadvertently curse the baby. That's how much powerful energy that goes through our culture that we believe those kinds of things. And many of these other stories I'm going to read tonight are basically warnings from our parents and our grandparents to always be on the lookout for other things that we cannot explain. So I'm going to move on to another story. This one is shared by a Mexican lady, and she's an author and very fond of her work. Her name is Silvia Moreno Garcia, and she titles this story, The Witch. It was in the Sierra in the years of the Revolution. There was a town of witches, and everyone knew to be wary of the town. And when they went there to trade or sell their wares, People made sure to leave before nightfall. My youngest uncle was tall and handsome, and all the girls were in love with him. He was charming, lively, and he could tell jokes well, and with the rifle slung over his shoulder, he could cut an impressive figure. This was his downfall. One day, the men took him to the witch town, and they set off with their weapons and their wares. My mother didn't want them to go because she didn't like the town. She especially didn't want her littlest brother there. He was her favorite, and she mothered him. Glad for his sparkling stories and smiles, but the men insisted he should accompany them. It would do him good to step outside instead of being cooped up in the house, and besides, they needed the help. They went to the market, and all was well, until towards the end of the day, a young woman passed by in front of the men. She zeroed in on my young uncle. She was interested in him and made an overture, but he wasn't interested in her. When he dismissed her kindly and she persisted, he lost his patience and became rude, cracking a joke or two at her expense. This sent the other men roaring with laughter, and the woman frowned. She told him he would pay for his jest. She would cast a spell on him, and he'd be hers. She turned him into a stool to sit on. Glad I'm on a chair. She muttered their taunts and curses, but the men shooed her off, yelling and calling her names. My uncle was upset and wondered if he should try to make up with the woman and apologize. The others, however, were ready in the mounts. Dusk was arriving and they needed to ride back, but by the time the men returned home, they had joked and distracted my uncle. He forgot his misgivings. The family ate dinner and everyone went to bed. And it was in the middle of the night that my uncle ventured to the outhouse. He never returned to the room he shared with his sibling, and in the morning, the men went looking for him. He was nowhere to be found. My mother was distraught. She blamed her older brothers for what had happened, saying they had not taken care of her little brother, but none of them would shoulder this blame. My mother prayed often, and one night, the prayers were answered because my uncle suddenly showed up at the doorstep. He looked tired and haggard, no longer his brash, bright self, and the men were out on a hunting expedition. My mother offered my uncle food and drink, and he sat in the kitchen, and eventually he told my mother that he had been spirited away by the witch from the market. I dropped my case here, guys, sorry. She had turned him into a stool, and she promised, although she now let him roam around the town in his human form, he had managed to get away that night but was afraid. My mother grabbed a rifle and provisions. They went to the barn to ready a horse. But sadly, in the amount, they heard noises above their heads on the roof of the barn. A scratching and then laughter, female laughter. My mother readied the rifle. You learn to shoot since you are knee-high in our culture in the Sierra. She was not afraid, but he was scared. My uncle ran outside, telling my mother it was the witch, that she'd found him, and he must go back or his family would suffer. My mother rushed after him and with the rifle, but there was no one there. She circled the barn, she circled the house, she walked through the cornfield, and the wind bent the stalks, but she was alone. And that night she didn't sleep, and instead, by the window, she sat there clutching her firearm, and there were no other disturbances. As for my uncle, no one ever saw him again. The men, when they returned from the hunt, cold and wet from an icy rain which had fallen that whole day, and she said she must have dreamed the whole thing. Well, she knew better. That is why you must be careful if you are ever in the Sierra. There are witches and warlocks there who speak to the stones and turn people into animals. And I'll tell you the name of the witches, but you must not say it out loud. I'll whisper it, and you can whisper it to your children. Now, on the subject of witches, this story is shared by my Uncle Don. We sat one day, and you'd probably be pleased, but I said, I'm going to call this one Bruja Lechuga, which means witch lettuce. Uncle Chado tells me about a time in the old days with the elders that your grandmother or your mothers would always say, you're going to the dance tonight, but, be on the lookout of certain things and make sure you get back. And in those times, it wasn't like we had phones and all that, and you could check in right away, say, hey, Mom, I'll be home in a while, or can I stay at my friend's house? During this time, people would go to this dance. And from this story he shares with me, he says that all these kids, they were together, and they're having a good time, and they're getting a little lit, and it's about time to go home. And they walked home at those times. There wasn't cars or any of that. It's late 1800s, early 19th century. And as they're getting home, they come across this elderly couple. And there was no one else around. And the elderly couple said, oh, hijos, mijas, are you guys tired? You need somewhere to stay? And they said, oh, sure, yes, thank you, nice lady, senora. Well, we have a home, and you guys can come stay with us tonight. It'll be fine, and you can leave in the morning, and we'll take care of you. And they said, okay. So the husband goes wherever, probably to go unlock the house or whatever, and get ready for the company. And all the kids are in their best garb, and they finally get to the house with the lady. I guess all goes well. They go to sleep or whatever. Before they went to sleep, what it tells me is that they looked at this little house, and they're like, how are we all going to fit here? You guys have like a little house. Oh, don't worry about it. We'll make room. And so, okay. They stayed the night. Apparently, they made room. But the funny thing is, the next morning, all the kids started to wake up. And by then, the husband had come back sometime during the night. And they were like, oh, well, I guess we all better start getting ready to go home. And all of them started saying, okay, well, hey, thank you for your hospitality. As the funny thing is, as they begin to walk home, they start talking about how their night went, how they had a ball, and how lucky they got to meet these older people to let them be so kind to stay in their home. And they said, I can't remember where I slept. Like, me neither. And as they're going amongst themselves trying to clear, like, where did we all sleep? I mean, this house was small. One of the girls looks at one of the boys, and he had this nice jacket on. And what my uncle tells me, he says, you look at this hole, and it's not like your typical hole on this jacket, but she sees it, notices, it's like, you've got, like, it's not a rip, it's like a bite. Like, somebody bit a chunk out of your coat, man. Like, who's gonna eat on your coat? The crazy thing is, word of mouth gets back around about these people, and they don't know for sure, because it's still it's an old story. They don't know for sure if these people had some kind of magical powers or something, but what they started coming to as they were playing back, how their night went. You said, I dreamt that I was a chair, or I dreamt that I was this little couch, or I dreamt that I was some fruit. And one of the other guys says, yeah, I dreamt that I was a head of lettuce, man. And that the husband had come back through, and he was going to, what he gathers is he went to take a bite out of the lettuce, and the older lady said, no, you can't have that. So was that his jacket? If the guy would have kept eating the lettuce, he probably would have ate the kid. I don't know. I leave it up to you guys to decide on that one. But I'm going to go on to another personal story. This other one comes from my uncle. And this one is about a time with my grandpa Fred, his father. Uncle tells me about a cousin they had. This guy was well liked by everyone. He could tell good jokes, good stories, and pretty straight guy. He was a really neat character, is what my uncle says to me. So I'm listening to the story, and he shares with me one time that his cousin out of Greeley, Colorado, local, right? He wants my grandpa Fred and my uncle to come out to him. He says, you guys got to get out here, man. He's like, you got to come help me. And they're like, why so frantic? And Grandpa Fred's like, okay, let's go check it out, man. Let's see what's going on over here with your cousin. So, they get to the house, and there he is, and he's got his pistol. And he's just like, man. I was like, what is going on, cousin? He's like, he was really scared. And he said he wasn't a guy that to be like that, but you could tell he's really scared. And he wasn't on drugs, he wasn't on alcohol, none of that. And I My grandpa's talking to him. He's like, what is going on? He's like, don't you guys see it? And he's like, see what? He's like, la bola, the ball. He kept describing to them that he was seeing this big ball of light, and it was coming for him, and it scared him because he couldn't decide what the heck it was. And so, crazy enough, he's shooting at it. And my uncle Don's telling him, he's like, man, what are you doing, man? You can't be shooting out here in the residential neighborhood. The cops are looking, they're gonna think you're crazy. But he was fearing for his life. And so they got him calmed down and all, but we never did find out what it was that he actually saw. Was it something in his mind? I mean, what was he going through? It was interesting, though, that my uncle told me this story about that ball of light, because in our field, when we investigate and we do different things dealing with the supernatural, sometimes spirit will manifest in front of us. It could be in one person's face, and the other person next to you won't see it. So that's just a little something to think about. I'm going to go into my next story. Now, this one here, I'm going to read a little bit to you guys about it. This was one of the stories I covered last year. This comes from the Rio Grande area down in Texas and the northern part of Mexico. I'll swing over here because I can hear that. And this is about La Lechuza, or the Owl Witch. And the Owl Witch was known at a time that, the story goes, they think that she was a lady that was a healer, curandera. And some people may have gotten jealous of her gifts from God to be able to help heal people. You got to think, from our native culture, we are medicine people. So that goes for men and women that have the ability to do this. So in the culture there, the people got scared. And they were very afraid of this woman and her powers. And so what they did is, during the times, of the witch hunts and all, this was happening in Mexico and in that whole south area. They went and rounded her up, and they put her in the stocks, and then they eventually executed her. Now, in this part of the story, people think that she made a pact with the devil to curse all these people for just misjudging her and killing her the way they did. They didn't even have a heart. They just took her and did what they did. So for revenge, she was going to, from that day on, stalk people that were drunkards, or people that thought they were better than other people, or just anybody who happened to be out at night where they shouldn't have been. And what people report now from down in Texas is that they are still seeing this creature. This thing can be several feet tall, anywhere from 4 to 6 feet tall, wingspan, just big as heck, man. Sometimes 6, 8 feet. You think about these animals, like, these birds are big. I'm like, but big enough to swoop down and take a person. They say that La Lechuza has the body of an owl, but the head of a human or a wicked-looking witch, an old hag. Now, the way that she draws people in is she preys on their innocence, preys on their compassion for human beings. Now, we spoke about infants earlier in this first big case, and that's precisely what she does. She will use mimic the calls of a baby crying. Now, who in here would be like, man, if I heard a baby, I would run out there, right? We wouldn't think twice. We would go right out there. We're like, we need to help somebody. That's a child. People are more apt to do that for adults, which is kind of sad, but that's the truth. It is where she traps them. As soon as they go out, if you go outside your house, you are not safe anymore. Your house is your sanctuary, and she knows that. So when she comes out, she's waiting up on the rooftops or in the trees, and before you know it, as soon as you go out to check and see what that was, wham, she comes down and she swoops you up and takes you off either to her lair or eats you right there. And that's what she does to keep exacting her revenge and increasing her powers. Now, that's just one story, but a lot of people are telling me from that area, from my family and other researchers involved down in Texas, that this is very real, and they are continuing to see this down there. Even in Mexico itself, down in Mexico City, back in the 90s, they were seeing flying humanoids. UFOs are very big down in Mexico. And so there's people out there with cameras all the time. Jaime Maussan, he's a great guy. He likes to really come out with all this stuff and show people the evidence, like, these are here. And he interviewed this cop that was down there, the Mexican police. He was out on patrol one night and finally parked in this alleyway, and he was in a little Volkswagen police car. Now when I say Volkswagen, not these new nice Jettas. Back then, these were the old Bugs, you know, the cool little German cars. And he said he got a report that some people were seeing something in the sky. And so he investigated, and upon reaching the site, there was this big flying humanoid, and he couldn't make out what it was until it got closer. And when it got closer, it was coming for him. It was coming to literally come attack him. And so he started kind of fearing for his life as he's pulling back in reverse, frantically trying to go backwards to get away from this thing, because you got to remember, he was in a tight little alleyway, so he couldn't just like turn around. So you got to go back, Jack. He's trying to go backwards. He said this thing gets close enough and it begins to claw and pound on his hood and come at the windshield. He says, and it has the face of like a witch, but in his descriptions where he's drawing the picture, it looks more like an alien gray, but with really big black eyes, but almost like it has a hood on, not your typical extraterrestrial that most people describe. Luckily, it finally gave up. But by the time his sergeant and everyone else came out there to check on him, the dude was like white. He was shaking frantically. It took him a while to calm him down by the time the ambulance got there. And they went and checked him out in the ER. Of course, they had to check him out, make sure he wasn't dreaming or doing any of that. And he wasn't. He was legit. They did an interview with him on live TV there, and you could see it in his face that I was like, something really happened to this poor guy. Now, the thing about La Lechuza, and I've heard this through my own family, that sometimes people tried to kill it. There was even an incident in our family that someone had said, hey, you know, we were able to shoot her. And they said that they shot it on its side. And then for a few days, it didn't show up. It wasn't until one of the older ladies in the village wouldn't come out of her house for a while. Someone went to check on her, and she was suffering from a wound, a gunshot wound to the side of her ribs. How true is that? I don't know. That comes from family that spread, you know, they spread these stories, they share them over, and I tend to find that very typical and all that, but it's frightening to know, like, did she really transform back? And I don't know if she died or not, but it was really interesting to know that part. Now I'm going to go into another little story here, and this is about our own boogeyman in Mexico. It's the cucuy. And the cucuy is something that our parents like to scare us with, especially down in Texas. Because, you know, kids aren't being mindful. They want to not listen to their parents. And so mothers and fathers say, you know what, if you don't go to bed on time, or you don't listen to what I'm telling you, cucuy is going to come for you. And it is known in our culture that if he does come for you, sometimes he toys with people, just gives them a warning. And other times he takes them off, and either to eat them right there or somewhere else in his lair, just kind of like La Lechuza. Now, there's this guy that I read his story. He was talking about one day he was really pissing off his mom, and his mom told him, I'm going to warn you, if you don't listen to me, the cucuy is going to come to you tonight, and he's going to give you a warning. And his first warning is he's going to claw the bottom of your feet. If you continue to do this and keep taking this path with me and not listening, then the next time he comes around, he's going to take you off and eat you, and we will never see you again. This guy's like 15, 16 years old at the time. He's like, yeah, right, you know, my mom's full of it. Whatever. Still being a little travesito is what we call you, mischief, you know. Goes to bed that night. Sleeps well. Next morning, he gets up, he's getting ready to go for his day, gets out of the bed. Soon as he steps on the floor, his feet hurt. And he's like, what the heck? He's feeling sharp pain. So he goes to sit down. And he sits down on his bed, and he starts looking at the bottoms of his feet. And wouldn't you know it, he had these deep, bleeding claw marks into the bottom of his feet. Now this guy said that You know, it scared him a little bit. He's like, what the heck, was my mom right, Earl? But he was like, one, either the kukui came in the middle of the night like my mother said he would and clawed the bottom of my feet. How I didn't feel it, I won't know. He says, boy, I got these scratches here. He said, or was my mom so insane enough to come in the middle of the night in my room and claw my feet herself? And that's when I was like, either way, that sucks, man. This little story is about, it was a funny little thing I came across, and I just wanted to share it with you guys for a minute. But it's called La Mano Peluda, or the hairy hand. Now, I know a lot of cultures in Europe talk about these hairy hands that can attack people and all. It's like, I remember when I was a kid with my dad and my brother, my dad would let me watch all kinds of movies, like we were seeing today. You'll be all right, watch it. If you don't go to sleep, that's your fault. So he let us watch these movies, right? And back in the 80s, there was this, it might have been late 70s or mid 80s. I don't remember, I was around, but we watched this one movie and it was called The Hand.
Yes.
So if you remember The Hand? And this guy, you know, his hand gets lopped off, like, what was it, an accident or something, right? Anyways, the hand's coming back around and this committing murders and all that. And I remember this part where that guy's, he got lucky that night with this lady, and boy, he was doing his thing, and next thing you know, this hand came up and killed the lady while I was like, that's what I remember from it. I could be wrong, but that messed me up. But this thing, the Mano Peluda, is said to belong to a man who was killed by the Inquisition in Mexico, chopped up and buried in an old Indian cemetery. And only his hand came back to life and lurks in the darkness under the beds of misbehaved children, hoping to grab them by the ankle and drag them to who knows where. Now, my friends in Texas right now are celebrating World Bigfoot Day, and maybe in the next couple of years I'll be down with them and hanging out. But we have our own Mexican Bigfoot, and this is down into deep Central and South America. This is known as the Sisemite, and the Sisemite goes by 3 different names, and you know, these are very rare to see. No one has actual photographs of them, so the pictures that I got of them were actual drawings. It's a Bigfoot-like creature in Central and South American folklore. In Belizean and Honduran folklore, the Sisemito, or Itakeo, was a bipedal, upright, gorilla-like creature that possesses a head much like a human's, with long hair and fur covering its body. It may also be referred to as the Mexican Bigfoot. It's known in other neighboring countries as Guatemala, Nicaragua, and southern Mexico. The Sisemite is a humanoid creature with black or dark fur, brown fur, much larger than the average person, has 4 fingers on each hand but no thumbs, ape-like facial features, and backwards feet with no knees. Now, if you were here last year and I talked about Las Ciguapas, those were lady sirens of the Dominican Republic, and they had backwards feet, and it was so that people couldn't track them. You'd think they're going one way and they're actually going the other. So that might be a little bit something with the Sisemite, not sure. But it's said to have a huge force capable of breaking bones in one blow. Its name also differs from the ethnic groups around there. The name has no true English translation, and it appears to come from the Nahuatl word Sisemito. The legend has also changed the society. Now we look at Honduras, and Honduras' story goes like this. To their legends, it's believed that the Sisemite have a preference under women. Now you hear in many of our Native American clans and tribes, we talk about these big hairy-like beasts that come away and steal children away and women away and they're never seen again. This is kind of like that. These things come to the Honduran women, and upon falling in love with one, he will claim her as her own and never to be found again. Love's strange, huh? The Honduran explorer and historian Jesus Aguilar Paz said that the Sisemite lives in the highest part of the Honduran mountains, more specifically in the inaccessible caverns found there. Aguilar also explains that the Sisemite feeds on the wild berries from the mountains, and that is not a carnivorous being or a hunter. However, it usually goes down to the village to kidnap women to take them to their cave and rape them. This union is believed to produce 8 men. This made me think, like in Russia, they talk about the almas being a Neanderthal, or maybe something that's breeding with human beings. So you look that up a little bit, and it'll kind of coincide with this story here. Many people still comment with admiration on the amazing story of a woman who managed to escape from the cave where a Sisamite had taken her. It's said that the monster, upon realizing her disappearance, chased the woman with their 3 human 8 children. She ran into a river and escaped by swimming across. On the other side of the river, the Sisamite held the children they had procreated, hoping that she would change her mind. But the woman ran away and saw how the Sisamite, annoyed, threw his children into the river, never to resurface again. In Belize, their legend says that a Sisamite also feasts on human beings. And furthermore, in Belizean societies, the belief is, if you are a man and you look at him in the eyes and escaped, you will die in 1 month. If you're a woman and you look at him in the eyes and escaped, your life will be prolonged. Hence, women live longer than men. If you're looking at Sisamite, just say it. Tales of the Sisamite were told in the camps by the mahogany cutters of early days and are still passed along in villages. 10 minutes? Really? Oh, well, I guess I just better hurry up then, huh? Well, anyways, I'm going to tell one more story. I wanted to tell a Sibon, and that'll only take me about 5 minutes, and then we'll do my last one, okay? You guys are cold, man. Cold.
Yeah, just follow orders, man. Just do it.
Oh, you guys are fine. You guys are fine.
Thank you.
El Sibon is, according to legend, it's a spirit of a youth who was murdered and disemboweled by his father for killing his wife, saying that she was a slut and that she was asking for it. Afterwards, his grandfather ordered the youth to be tied to a post in the middle of the countryside and lashed him until his back was destroyed. His wounds were then cleaned with alcohol, and he was released with 2 rabid, starving dogs set upon him. Before releasing him, his grandfather condemned him to carry the bones of his father for all eternity. It is a characteristic whistle that resembles the musical notes. Stevie could probably read you these notes, but I'm not going to have to do it. Rising in the tone to F and then lowering to B. I went to a Los Lobos concert, and he said, E is the key of God. It is said that when the whistling sound closes, there's no danger, and the whistler is far away. But when the whistling sounds are distant, it means it is nearby. It's also said that hearing the whistling foretells your own death, and you can hear it anywhere at any time. Many inhabitants of Los Llanos say that they have seen it primarily in the summer, a time when the Venezuelan savanna burns in the harsh drought, and the whistler sits in the trees and gathers dust in his hands. But it is mainly on a rainy or humid day that the spirit wanders, hungry for death and eager to punish drunkards, womanizers, or sometimes innocent victims. It says that it sucks the alcohol out of drunkards and through their navel, and when it finds them alone, it tears womanizers to pieces, removes their bones, and then puts them in his sack to remain there with his father. Some versions say that it appears at night as a giant about 6 meters that moves among the treetops, creaking and emitting its chilling whistle. Inside its old and tattered sack lie the bones of its father, and according to some renditions, its multiple victims. Others say he appears as the shadow of a tall, thin man, and with a hat, and he goes after drunkards most of all. So I guess I better not be drinking too much. They say that the whistler can appear by a house on certain nights, drop his sack on the ground, and count the bones one by one. And if anyone hears it, nothing will happen. But if no one hears it before dawn, one member of your family will never wake up again. In this situation, the only thing that can save you is the sound of a dog barking, as it is the only thing that is afraid of a chill or a whip. The spirit takes revenge of the womanizers. So since I'm having to wrap it up, I did want to tell you guys one more little thing. It's just another little tidbit from my country. You guys like a lot of Mexican food and all that, I'm sure. There's a dish called pozole. And pozole, it's made with hominy and pork and all the spices. It looks a lot like menudo, but it's not menudo. Now, pozole came from the Aztec Empire, and during that time, it was a delicacy. Only noblemen and the emperor himself could partake in this dish. that time, it was either their Zolo dogs, which were equivalent to human beings. These are the hairless dogs. You saw a little bit of their pictures coming across. Zolos were almost wiped out by the conquistadors because they feared them. They were the guardians of the underworld. So if the dogs were put into this dish, it was a really, really prime dish. The other meat that was in there was human flesh. So we did have cannibalism in our culture. But it wasn't until when the culture of the conquistadors came that Hernan Cortez and all of them ordered them to stop making that type of dish, and that they would replace the dog and the human meat with pork. And that's how that came to be. And so now this dish is served around any class of people. Just goes to show you that the rich eat the rich, I guess, and then next thing you know, everybody gets to partake in it, right? I was going to share more with you, a last video and all, but we don't have enough time. Maybe next time if I come back again, I would love to do that. But I want to close with a closing prayer, if you're all cool with that. Everyone here gathered tonight, Creator, I ask that you watch over them wherever they may go. Sometimes there are spirits and other things amongst us, and I ask that you protect all of us and keep us safe from anything parasitic in this world or the next. And I honor our ancestors tonight, thanking them for being able to allow me to be here today, being the answer to their prayers as each one of us are, and allow me to tell their story. This is how we remember our people, by sharing it amongst all of us. So the next time you see one of us, you can ask about the Sole, or you can ask about one of these other things that I talked about, and hopefully they know a little bit, and you guys will know a little more. So God bless you all, and you have a great night, and thank you again.
All right, guys, let's give it up for Jose one more time. That was an awesome job. Can't beat that, from the heart. It's culture. That was awesome. Thank you, Jose. Always honored to have you up here.